My name is Gianna. I'm 33 years old, and I work in communications in Boston. After nearly 2 weeks on a business trip in San Francisco, I came home just as the late afternoon sun began to fade. But what waited for me wasn't a welcoming embrace or the familiar warmth of dinner. On the lawn, 16 large black trash bags stood in a straight line like a cold, unyielding wall. Right beside them, a bright red sign caught my eye: for sale, sold. My mother stood on the porch, arms crossed, her face unreadable. Next to her were my two brothers, Nathan and Eric, looking at me as if I were a stranger. Then my mother spoke, her voice light, as if she were reading the weather forecast. "This house doesn't belong to you anymore. I had lived here my entire life. I was the one who stayed behind to care for her after Dad passed away. I was the one quietly paying property taxes for the last 4 years while my brothers lived comfortably elsewhere. And now I was being thrown out with the trash bags. Have you ever had your own family turn their back on you? When you gave up everything only to be met with ruthless denial? If you've ever been through something like this, leave a comment below, hit like if you understand the sting of betrayal, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel to walk with me through this journey. Because this was only the beginning. The real story began when I discovered I had never truly been considered part of this family. I stood frozen, my feet rooted to the concrete walkway. A gust of wind blew through, scattering loose papers from one of the torn trash bags, and an electric bill with my name on it fluttered across the yard. The whole scene felt staged, like a play where the director was about to step out and shout, "Cut." I found my voice, not loud but steady, echoing in the awkward silence while the neighbors watched. "Mom, what's going on here?" Linda didn't move. She clutched an old notebook tightly in her hand, her eyes unblinking as she answered. "Gianna, you're 33. You need to take care of your own life. You can't stay here forever." I looked at her, then at Nathan and Eric. They stayed quiet, staring off at the rose bushes blooming behind me as if they mattered more than the sister being cast out. "I've lived here since I was a child. Dad left me part of this house. I'm a co-owner. You can't sell it without me," I said, my face burning with anger. Linda frowned. "Your father's will was clear, but I hold the deed. This house is in my name. I have the right to decide." "What about my share?" She paused for a beat. Then Nathan stepped in, his hands buried in his pockets, his voice unnervingly calm. "We've already done the math. Your share is reduced because you've lived here all these years without paying rent. Over 10 years, Gianna." I let out a dry, bitter laugh. "No rent? And where were you when Mom slipped in the bathroom? When the roof leaked? When someone had to sign short-term loans to cover property taxes? Who paid most of the bills because everyone else was having a hard time?" No one answered. Across the street, Mrs. Peterson stood with her pruning shears, watching openly. Next to her, Mr. Howard from number 6 had just shut off his car and now frowned at me, as though I were the one in the wrong. I walked toward the trash bags. One had split open, revealing a box of framed photos from my room. I bent down and picked one up, a picture of me with Dad at Echo Lake when I was a teenager. The glass was cracked, but his eyes in the photo were as gentle as the last trace of kindness left in this family. I turned back, my voice trembling but steady enough. "If you want me gone, then admit this isn't about me refusing to grow up. This is because the three of you plotted, sold this house behind my back while I was working to build a life. This is because the three of you agreed to push me out as if I never existed." Eric bit his lip. Nathan avoided my gaze. My mother sighed and answered slowly, "I did this because I want better for you. You need to be pushed out into the world to learn how to live." By selling the house without a word? By stuffing my things into trash bags and calling it a lesson? Her face didn't change. "I didn't want you to argue. If I'd told you earlier, you would have resisted. I couldn't let you hold on forever." I felt the eyes of the neighbors burning into me. Some were recording with their phones, part of me went numb. Part of me felt like I was hovering outside my own body, watching as an unwilling spectator. When will I get my share of the money? My mother turned away. Nathan answered, "The lawyer is handling it. You'll get a transfer soon, but like Mom said, your share will be reduced for the years you didn't contribute properly." You think I'll let this go? What can you do? We signed the contract last week. The new owners get the keys tomorrow morning. My chest tightened. Last week? Nathan shrugged, still avoiding my eyes. I stood there for a few seconds longer, then slowly bent down and gathered my belongings, as if picking up the scattered pieces of a life that had just been torn apart. My mother muttered, barely above a whisper, but clear enough for me to hear, "You'll thank me someday." I didn't respond. I opened the trunk of my old sedan, the car I bought with my bonus last year, and began loading the bags. It was now the only place I could call mine. As I pulled the last bag in, a folder slipped out. I picked it up and saw it was a printed copy of the house sale contract. Beneath my mother's and brother's signatures, my name was missing. I looked at her. She quietly turned away. When I shut the trunk, Eric spoke softly, "If you need a place to stay." I cut him off with a look. Not angry, not pleading, just the distance that had finally taken shape. I got in the car, started the engine, and glanced back through the rearview mirror. They were still standing there, the three of them, bound together as one unit. I was no longer part of it. Maybe I never truly was. The car rolled down the driveway, past the street where I had once learned to ride a bike, where I had fallen and laughed. Now, all that was left was the echo of a car door slamming shut behind me. And as the door to that family closed, I didn't look back. Not once. I pulled over a few blocks away, my hands still on the steering wheel, unable to press the gas. A lump rose in my throat like a wave refusing to break. The last rays of sun stretched across the sidewalk, blinding through the windshield not from the brightness, but from the raw sting of a wound laid bare. I closed my eyes, leaned back against the seat, and tried to breathe deep. In my mind, I saw my father's face, the only person who had ever seen my worth without demanding proof. I was 10 when he died, liver cancer sweeping in like a storm, stealing the man who had taken me camping every summer, who tied my hair each morning before work. I remembered sitting in the office of our family lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, an older man with silver hair and glasses sliding down his nose. He read my father's will slowly and clearly. The house would be divided equally among the 3 children, each getting an equal share. Linda, my mother, would hold primary control until all of us were legally adults. Back then, I was 10, Nathan was 15, and Eric was 13. I hadn't understood much about paperwork. I only knew Dad wanted us all protected, treated fairly. He loved my mother that I never doubted, but he also knew she wasn't gentle or flexible. Maybe he thought dividing things equally would prevent favoritism. Maybe he believed she would choose fairness. I grew up in that house, spending every holiday with Mom, cooking, tending the garden, shoveling snow each winter. Slowly, I became the shadow everyone assumed would always be there. Nathan left after high school with a sports scholarship to California. Eric went to college, then settled in Connecticut. And me? I stayed. Because Mom asked, because she's too old to live alone, because someone needed to hold the house together. For nearly 10 years, I worked full-time at an ad agency while also handling utility bills, paying property taxes, signing short-term loans when necessary. No one forced me, but no one ever thanked me either. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought if I was patient, if I was devoted, my family would see me. That I didn't need to go far or flaunt anything, only to be present to be here, in the house where my father once planted yellow chrysanthemums along the fence. I thought that was enough to hold us together. But on the very day I closed a $1.2 million contract for the biggest client of my career, the very day I believed I was finally rising to a new level, My family pushed me out the door like a freeloader. The laptop on the passenger seat still held the presentation I'd worked on for 3 sleepless nights, the strategies mapped out for a sustainable campaign over 3 fiscal quarters, an achievement any colleague would admire. Yet sitting in that quiet neighborhood street, that success couldn't soothe the ache of losing the roots I thought I still had. I thought about how my mother looked at me that afternoon. Not angry, not guilty, just cold. She wasn't treating me as a daughter anymore, but as a burden to be discarded. I wondered what my father would think if he could see this. Would he recognize the calculation, the way she wielded the paperwork to sidestep morality? Would he believe that the woman who once sat by his hospital bed every day was the same one who sold the house he left to all 3 children, erasing his youngest daughter from the plan entirely? My eyes burned, not because I lost a house, but because I had just lost the last place where I believed I belonged. A name in a will couldn't hold my place in a mother's heart that had chosen to erase me from her future. A car honked behind me. I startled, gripped the wheel, signaled left, and pulled onto the road toward Allison's place, the only friend I could call now. I wouldn't collapse. But on nights like this, people deserve to feel the pain. To sit with the loss, not to wallow, but to understand what remains. And that's where I had to begin. What do I have left? And can I rebuild it all without giving up my dignity the way I had for so many years? I arrived at Allison's house when the sky had already darkened, my shoes heavy with road dust dragging across the old wooden steps. She opened the door before I could even knock, as if she had sensed that something inside me had already shattered. Allie. I tried to speak, but my voice was so hoarse I barely recognized it as my own. Allison didn't ask questions. She just wrapped her arms tightly around me, gentle as a warm blanket in the middle of winter. That warmth broke apart every layer of strength I had forced myself to hold onto all afternoon. Her small apartment was as quiet as always, soft yellow light spilling across the wooden floor. I dropped onto the sofa, staring at my suitcase as if it could explain everything. Allison brewed a cup of hot mint tea, set it on the table without a word, and sat down across from me. "Do you want to talk?" Her question was light, not pushing, just an open door. I nodded, not because I was ready, but because if I kept it locked inside any longer, I feared I wouldn't survive it. My whole family, they planned this. All of it. I bent down, opened my suitcase, and pulled out a crumpled paper I had found while gathering my things. A glossy printout, the top corner folded, the headline clear: "Charming colonial home, move-in ready, 5 beds, 3 baths." Below were 6 interior photos. One of them was my bedroom, with my cream-colored scarf still draped neatly across the bedpost. Allison took the paper, her eyes widening. "Gianna, how long has this been listed?" I pulled out my phone, opening the family group chat I had been quietly added to but never once consulted. My finger scrolled past endless old conversations until I stopped at a thread from over a month ago. "Nathan, let's post the listing on the 12th. Gianna will be tied up with the San Francisco project." Linda, right. She won't have time to question anything. Eric, are you sure the buyers won't need to see her room first? Linda, I'll say it's storage. Lock the door and it's fine. Allison read those lines, her knuckles whitening as she gripped my phone. I continued, my voice dry. They picked the timing while I was on a business trip. Not by chance. Every step was orchestrated. She sat silent for a moment, then asked, "But the paperwork, how could they sign without your signature?" I shook my head, then dug through the bag. Beneath the files was a utility bill with my name on it, the old house address, dated 2 years ago, and it wasn't the only one. I pulled out several more, all under my name, each with an electronic signature, forged. I never opened these accounts. I never agreed to put my name on any services after 5 years ago. Allison stared at the stack of bills. Your mother might have used your personal information. I nodded faintly. Did you notice anything strange before this? I suddenly remembered a phone call years ago from the power company. They had asked about an unpaid balance. At the time, I thought it was a mistake. I assumed Mom had paid. And maybe they confused me with someone else since we shared the address. I didn't follow up. I was buried in major campaigns. Maybe I ignored too many signs, I murmured, my vision blurring with a thin film of tears. Allison gently rested her hand on my shoulder. You trusted them. No one can blame you for that. But now, you have to protect yourself. I sat silently, clutching the folder with a painful mix of familiarity and strangeness. Since childhood, I had been the pliable one, the one who gave in easily, raised to believe family was sacred and unquestionable. Never had I thought that trust would be twisted into a weapon against me. I lifted my head. The overhead light reflected softly in Allison's steady gaze. What do you think I should do? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she went into her bedroom and returned with a small wooden box. My boyfriend Jake is in law school. He once gave me a list of lawyers who offer free consultations for civil violations. I think we should start there. I looked at the box as if it were a hand reaching down to pull me from a pit, not a solution, but a direction. I nodded, just barely. But inside, I felt something shift. I pulled out my phone again, opening the listing photo of my bedroom. I zoomed in on the desk, where a framed picture sat me and Dad at a fall festival when I was 14. In the photo, I was smiling and he was leaning down to whisper something in my ear. I couldn't remember what he had said. But in that moment, I swore I could almost hear him again, a voice from deep within memory. They turned their backs, I whispered, more to myself than to her. But I won't turn away anymore. The next morning, I stepped out of Allison's guest room with a hot cup of coffee in hand. Thin sunlight filtered through the curtains, making the apartment feel a little warmer. Still, unease clung to me like fog. I sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and began searching rental listings near my office. I filtered by price, size, amenities, location. Even on a tight budget, I hoped to find a decent place to start over. After a few clicks, one small studio in a quiet neighborhood on the south side caught my eye. The rent was just within reach, and the landlord had written, "Preference for stable employment, strong credit score." I immediately filled out the application form, attached my employer letter and 3 months of pay stubs. With my job, I felt confident I wouldn't be rejected. But less than 2 hours later, I got a call. Hello, Miss Whitman. This is James, property manager for the Millbrook building. I've reviewed your application. His tone was polite, but I sensed hesitation. Is there a problem? I asked. He cleared his throat. Your professional record is excellent. But when we checked your credit score, some concerns came up. I frowned. I don't understand. Your score is below the minimum. Specifically, there are 5 delinquent accounts, electricity, water, internet, and even cable, all tied to an address on Fenwick Street. The total outstanding balance is nearly $3,700. I froze. Fenwick Street? I've never lived there. What address is it? He read off the number. My ears buzzed when I heard the co-resident's name, Nathan Whitman. I steadied my voice. I've never resided at that address, and I never opened those accounts. A pause. Then it may have been an identity verification error, but the records show the social security number used belongs to you. The coffee in my cup went cold. I asked him for time to dispute it, and he politely agreed to hold the unit for 2 days. When I hung up, I sat motionless. My hands shook as I pulled out my worn Social Security card, my name still clear, yet I no longer felt in control of anything tied to it. I called the credit agency. After over an hour of questions, they confirmed Miss Gianna Whitman's personal information was used to open multiple accounts around mid last year. The billing address is 1027 Fenwick Street. I closed my eyes. I didn't need a map. I'd been there. Nathan's old apartment, the one he rented, after his company collapsed. I remembered the night he called Mom, begging for help. And I remembered how she withdrew nearly $15,000 from Dad's savings to give him another chance. But I had never thought they would use my name. That my mother would hand over my social security number so Nathan could sign up for utilities. I called Allison, my voice still shaking. "Where are you?" she asked instantly. "I'm at the apartment." "But, Allison, my credit score is destroyed." "What?" "There are 5 delinquent accounts under my name, but the address is Nathan's place." I heard her sigh, then the scrape of a chair. "We need to file a complaint immediately. If your mother or Nathan used your information without permission, that's identity fraud." "Do you have proof?" "I'm requesting copies of the contracts and statements from the utility companies." "Good, do it fast, and we'll need a lawyer specializing in identity cases." I exhaled heavily. I don't want to drag my mother into court. "No one does," Allison said gently. "But you have the right to protect yourself. You don't live in that house anymore. They're not people you can blindly trust again." I gripped the phone, feeling not anger, but a hollow emptiness. A cold hole where trust used to be. That afternoon, I printed every bill, every confirmation email, every credit report. I clipped them together in a blue folder and labeled it Gianna Identity Fraud. Looking at the folder on the table, I felt both foreign and heartbroken. Each sheet of paper wasn't just evidence of wrongdoing, it was another shard of what had once been my family bond. I called the law office Jake had recommended. A paralegal named Valerie answered, her voice calm and steady. She asked for details, then scheduled me for an appointment the next morning to open a formal case file. I hung up, looking around Allison's apartment, the tidy kitchen. Framed photos, the soft glow of warm light. It wasn't my home, but at least here I was heard, trusted, and my name stayed mine on every document. I drew a deep breath, pulled out my journal, and wrote the first line. The day I realized I no longer controlled my own name. The next morning I walked into the law office on a cold Tuesday. Boston's sky was heavy with clouds, the red brick streets pressed under the weight of winter air. The office was on the 3rd floor of an old building, the hallway carpet dark green, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Valerie, the same paralegal I had spoken to, greeted me with a gentle smile and a firm handshake. She led me into a small room, a dark wooden table, 2 chairs facing each other, shelves lined with neatly labeled binders. "Miss Whitman, Attorney Martinez will be right in. While you wait, I'll make copies of the documents you brought and enter them into the system." I nodded, sliding the blue folder across the table. Inside was everything: the credit report, copies of utility contracts, disputed bills, the real estate listing photos, even the family group chat messages Allison had helped me back up. Valerie took the folder without glancing at a single page, as if she was already used to handling files filled with stories people could barely say out loud. She left, closing the door softly behind her, leaving me with a steaming cup of tea and the weight of my own breath. About 10 minutes later, the door opened. Attorney Martinez walked in, a Hispanic man in his early 50s, small in stature but sharp in presence. He wore a white shirt with a gray sweater, no tie, his bright eyes behind thin glasses looking like they had grown used to finding the injustice hidden in stacks of paperwork. "Hello, Gianna," he said, shaking my hand. "I reviewed the file you sent. Your case isn't uncommon, but it isn't simple either. It requires patience and clarity from the victim's side." I sat up straight, hands resting on my lap to steady myself. "I don't want to destroy anyone," I said slowly. "But I also can't stay silent while my identity and reputation are being used without my permission." Martinez nodded, opened his laptop, and typed a few notes. Then the first thing you'll need to do is file a complaint with the National Identity Protection Commission. Next, a formal police report with the local department. We'll also send letters to the utility companies demanding they freeze all disputed debts during the investigation. I nodded. Everything he said was clear, logical, and exactly what I needed, a roadmap, a guide at a time when I couldn't see a way out. And the house? I asked, my voice quieter. He paused, studying me for a moment. The house has already been transferred, correct? But your name is still in the will dividing the assets? I have a copy of the original. My father left me an equal share, the same as my brothers. But your mother was the official title holder? Yes. Martinez exhaled lightly. You can petition the court to reassess your rights based on the will. And if the property has already been sold and the proceeds weren't distributed properly, we can file a civil suit to claim your portion even after the transfer. I went, still. For years, I had believed I was simply living in my parents' home unconditionally, never imagining I would one day have to hold legal documents just to prove my worth in every square foot of its foundation. Martinez closed his laptop, his gaze softening. You have a strong advantage, detailed records, clear timelines, and a suspected identity misuse tied to family. You don't need to ruin them. You just need to reclaim what's yours and protect your name. I left his office with a new folder, guidelines for filing, a set of sample complaint emails, and a checklist of steps to take. Under the pale midday sun, I felt like I was standing on the line between grief and beginning, not yet renewal, but at least a step forward. That evening, I spread the papers across Allison's dining table. She sat opposite me, a yellow highlighter in hand, marking each item. Her boyfriend Jake joined us, offering advice on how to phrase official emails to the utility companies. I jotted everything into my brown leather notebook, the one I usually used for work. But now, every page was evidence, a record of the path I had no choice but to walk to regain control of my life. I slipped memories between the pages, a photo of me with Dad by the lake, a congratulatory text from my boss after I closed a major contract, the electricity bill in my name that I had never opened. All of it sat there, between lines of blue and yellow ink, like a three-dimensional map of betrayal, awakening, and choice. No one can choose the family they're born into, but everyone has the right to choose how they exist after being cast aside by that family. And I was beginning to choose, not through bitterness, but through action, reason, and truth. I received a text from my mother on Friday morning, just as I finished sending complaint files to 3 utility companies. It was short, cold, like a notification. Meet me at Sugarbean, 11 a.m. today. I want to talk. Don't be late. No pleasantries. No extra words. I reread it several times, wondering why my heartbeat still slowed. Maybe because I had never once refused her. Maybe because a part of me still clung to something unnamed. I arrived 15 minutes early. Sugarbean was on a corner near downtown, where my mother often held book club meetings or afternoon teas with her women's circle. The cafe wasn't busy, soft light pouring through the glass windows, quiet jazz playing behind the clink of spoons against cups. I chose a table by the window. From there, I could see the entire cafe, and also my own reflection in the glass, a woman learning to hold her spine straight through the wreckage. My mother arrived exactly on time, her walk unchanged, shoulders back, chin slightly lifted, purse looped over her left arm like an extension of herself. She wore a teal cardigan, the same shade I had once picked when I bought her a silk scarf in San Francisco. The gift had ended up in a trash bag before I could ever give it. "Gianna," she said as she reached my table, "you look better than I expected." I nodded without smiling. She sat across from me, set her purse aside, and ordered as if this were just another social visit. A cappuccino, light foam. As usual. She glanced at me. What about you? I had coffee at home, I replied, eyes fixed on the folder in my bag. She pressed her lips together, gave a small nod. Silence lingered a moment before she spoke again. I know you're angry, but you shouldn't let this ruin you. I stayed still, she continued. You're making too big a deal of this. Every family sacrifices for each other at some point. I've sacrificed for you many times. All I asked was that you understand me and your brothers. Nathan truly needed saving then. I pulled the file from my bag, set it on the table, my hand still covering it. You used my social security number to open accounts in someone else's name. You forged my signature on service contracts. Do you know what that is? She looked at me, her eyes steady but defensive. I did it for Nathan. He had no other way. You had a stable job, a steady paycheck, credit cards. I didn't think it would cause much harm. Her tone was light, like she was talking about forgetting to water the plants. No trace of remorse. You broke the law, I said, my voice low but firm. That's identity theft. It's a civil violation, and if I don't address it properly, it could destroy my entire career. Her brow furrowed. Are you threatening me? I'm not threatening anyone. I'm stating the truth. I already filed complaints with the authorities. My attorney is working with the companies involved. Everything you did is fully documented. She went quiet for a few seconds, then gave a small laugh, shaking her head. You're like your father, always turning to the law when cornered. But family can't be settled by law, Gianna. Blood comes first. I met her eyes. I used to believe that. I used to think if I tried hard enough, sacrificed long enough, I'd be accepted. But you weren't trying to teach me independence. You just wanted me out of the way so you could split what was left. Her face hardened. I'm not going to argue with you. I just want you to stop this. If you still consider me your mother. I placed my hand on the file, slowly sliding it back into my bag. I don't need to be called your daughter if the cost is my reputation, my safety, and my dignity. She stayed silent. I saw her gaze falter, but she quickly regained her calm exterior. You've changed. The only change is that I don't need your approval anymore. I stood. She didn't stop me. As I walked out, I caught a glimpse of her through the glass, still stirring her cappuccino as if the conversation had never happened. I didn't look back, not because I was cold, but because I refused to step back into the role I had been forced into for years, the daughter who endured, who kept quiet, who carried the weight of family. I walked into the muted midday sunlight, strangely lighter, not because things were fixed, but because I had stopped hurting myself for something that no longer existed. I moved into my new apartment on a lightly rainy afternoon, the air damp with the scent of earth, the cool breeze making everything oddly quiet. The unit was on the second floor of an old wooden house, divided into 3 small rentals. Downstairs was a bakery called Marlene's Oven, with round windows and climbing roses blooming along the balcony. The landlord was Frank Doherty, a man in his 60s, plain-spoken, once a client in a campaign I ran when he rebranded his family's chain of bakeries. At a recent industry conference, when I mentioned I was urgently searching for housing, he had smiled, patted my shoulder, and said, "I've got a peaceful spot for you, if you don't mind old wooden beams and a bit too much morning light." We signed the rental papers in just one afternoon. No credit check. No questions about why I had left my old house. Only one sentence from him as he handed me the keys. "Gianna, I believe that someone who works with their whole heart can't possibly be a bad person." I stepped into the apartment with 2 boxes, 1 old suitcase, and a folder of legal documents wrapped carefully in leather. The wooden floor creaked in spots, the ivory walls carried a faint patina of time, but the wide window opened to a tree-lined street that filled the space with light. Allison came by late in the afternoon, bringing Jake and a large pizza. She set the box down on the small kitchen counter, slipped off her shoes, rolled up her sleeves, and moved around like the place was already hers. So, where do we start? Allison asked, her eyes shining as if we were heading into a childhood camping trip. I opened my bag and carefully unwrapped the photo frames I had protected in handkerchiefs. Landscapes I had shot on, work trips and short getaways. Lake Champlain at sunrise, a winding road in Vermont carpeted with golden leaves, snow fields stretching across Maine. Photos my mother had once dismissed with a glance and the words, "Looks like a cheap postcard." Allison set each frame on the table, checked the hooks, then turned to me. "Do you want them hung vertically or horizontally?" "Vertical. From the door it will draw the eye to the window," I answered softly. Strange how even such a small question made me feel considered in my own space. Something I had rarely felt in that old house. Jake fixed the lights. Allison arranged books on the shelf and placed a vase of dried lavender on the desk. Everything was done with a care I had never experienced before, certainly not from people I had once called family. When it all looked livable, we sat cross-legged on the floor, sharing pizza slices and sipping the white wine Jake had brought. Sunset poured through the glass, casting shimmering streaks across the walls like waterlight. I leaned back, watching the simple scene before me, and felt a strange lightness. "What will you hang on the blank wall above your bed?" Allison asked, her half-eaten slice still in hand. I paused, then said, "Probably the photo I took last fall. The red maple against a gray sky. The one my mother said looked like a gloomy movie scene." Allison smiled and rested her hand on my shoulder. "I think that's the one that shows you best. Calm in the middle of chaos." Her words caught in my throat not out of pain, but out of emotion. That night, after they left, I sat alone in the room that still smelled faintly of polished wood, listening to cars glide down the street and streetlights flick on one by one. I hung the photo where I had decided, pressed my palm against the cool wooden frame, then stepped back to look at a space I had shaped with my own hands, with the help of people who genuinely wanted to see me stand. The old house had been bigger, more comfortable, but it had never felt like mine. Here, with the old wooden chair, the cream curtains, and that photo against the peeling wall, I felt like I was stepping into my real life for the first time. No one deciding for me, no one controlling me, just me and what I chose to keep. I switched on the desk lamp, opened my journal. A new page, the first line. Today I officially moved into a space that is mine, no longer a guest in my own life. And I kept writing, each word steady. No longer the one enduring, but the one laying bricks for a foundation no one could tear down. That weekend, while sorting bills and preparing documents for my meeting with the lawyer on Monday, my phone rang. The screen flashed Darren, my cousin in Chicago. He rarely contacted the family, but we stayed loosely connected through Thanksgiving or Christmas. I hesitated before answering. "Gianna, have you heard the news?" Darren's voice was low, edged with worry. "Depends on what news you're talking about," I said, setting my pen down, half expecting, half bracing. "About Aunt Linda and your brothers. They lost everything. The whole sum from selling the house. They put it all into some fund called Future Growth or something. The guy running it disappeared. When they log in now, it's all zeros." I leaned back in my chair, fingers gripping the armrest. Maybe I wasn't shocked, but hearing it aloud still sent a chill down my spine. "How much?" "Mom doesn't know exactly, but word is it was the entire payout after the house sale, around 600,000. I exhaled slowly, staring into the space before me. Not because of the money itself, but what it represented: greed disguised as blind confidence. The consequence of a family that never believed in listening to anyone but themselves. I thanked Darren for the call and hung up, a heaviness pressing into me. Less than 2 hours later, my mother texted, "No preamble, no veil. Call me. This is serious." I replied, "Say what you need in writing." Her next message was longer, tangled with emotional phrasing, but the core was clear. "I need a place to stay. Just temporary. Things will settle." I stared at the screen. Her words looked like an invitation back into the old role, the dutiful daughter, forever catching consequences she never caused. I called Allison, recounted everything. She listened silently, then asked gently, "What are you going to do?" I looked around my small apartment, the one where I had hung every photo myself, where I had felt for the first time that the space was untouched by anyone else's control. "I'll help, but not by letting her move here." Allison nodded. "You have the right to set conditions." That night, I called my mother. She answered after a few rings, her voice rushed, carrying something close to desperation. "Gianna, just hear me out. No one saw this coming. Future growth was recommended by someone at church. They promise guaranteed returns." I, Nathan, and Eric all thought, "What do you need?" I cut in, calm but firm, silence for a moment. Then she answered, "I need a place to stay, just until things get better. I have nothing in my account. The house is gone. Nathan's wife threw him out, and Eric, you know, he has nothing to spare." I closed my eyes. Her words fell like shards of glass, breaking apart piece by piece. "I'll help partly," I said, my voice steady. "I've researched senior housing options. There's a place called Brookside Living. They have private rooms, reliable care, and it's close to your church." Her tone shifted instantly. "A nursing home?" "Gianna, I'm not sick. I'm not the kind of person you put there. It's not about putting someone away. It's about safety, professional staff, essential services. Things I can't provide if you lived with me. And you know exactly why I can't allow that. You're my daughter. After everything I've done, this is how you repay me?" Her voice grew sharp. I stayed calm. "You used my social security number to open accounts for Nathan. You signed contracts under my name without a word. You damaged my credit and my reputation. And when I pushed back, you called it making too big a deal. I'm not going back to that role, Mom." I heard her breath on the line, heavy and uneven. No more arguments, just emptiness. "I'll cover the initial costs," I said. "If you agree, I'll pay the first 6 months at Brookside. But there's a condition." "What condition?" Her voice, smaller now, almost hollow. "You have to commit to family counseling once a month. I'll attend too, but it's non-negotiable if you want my continued support." On the other end, silence. I didn't press. "You don't have to decide today. They'll hold a room until the end of the week." I hung up, still holding the phone in my hand, eyes on the wet street outside. The rain had stopped, but puddles clung to the pavement. Streetlights glowed, scattering yellow reflections across the cold glass. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. Only clarity. The boundary was drawn. And I had finally learned how to keep myself from crossing it again, not out of duty, not out of guilt, but because I had lost too much not to understand. Family is worth keeping only when it doesn't destroy the core of who you are. About a week after that conversation, when the storm inside me had begun to quiet, I got a call from Eric. His name lit up my phone just as I was steeping afternoon tea, sunlight slanting through the window and across the wooden floor in dusty stripes. I didn't pick up right away. I watched the phone buzz on the table, that familiar name now foreign, like a stranger passing by. When the call went to voicemail, I finally sat down, poured the tea, and called back. Eric answered on the second ring, his voice hoarse, as if he'd been waiting. "Gianna, thank you for calling back." I didn't reply at once. Only the faint pop of the kettle cooling filled the air. He exhaled, then continued. "I don't know where to begin. I don't even know if you'll want to hear this, but I need to say it. I set the cup down, eyes fixed on the landscape, photo on the wall, a shot of Vermont's winter fields, the one I had taken alone on a drive to catch my breath after burning out on work. I'm listening, I said. I knew about Mom's plan to invest the house money, Eric said slowly, even before what happened to you, even before she listed the house, even before she told Nathan to find a broker. I froze, the air inside me hollow. You knew? Yes, he admitted. She told me. She believed future growth was the last chance to make quick profit. She said it was to save the family, her words. I warned her. I told Nathan too. But my grip tightened around the cup, my voice rasped. And after? After you knew she was about to throw everything into something untested, what did you do? He went quiet for a moment. I heard his sigh stretch across the silence. I thought about fighting it. But then she said, if something went wrong, at least you had a job, a career, the ability to stand on your own. I closed my eyes. My chest felt crushed. What did you just say? Gianna, Mom said if things went bad, you'd be the one to survive. Nathan wouldn't. He just separated. His job is unstable. She said you were stronger, more independent. You'd manage. I leaned back in my chair, still holding the teacup that had gone cold. Every word he spoke was like another layer of cold blanket pressed against my heart. Not because they doubted I could survive, but because they used that very fact as the reason to hurt me, to strip me of my right to be heard. Do you realize, I said, my voice dropping, you're telling me they saw me as a shock absorber they didn't need to care for? That since I could carry weight, I didn't deserve protection? I don't want you to take it that way, Eric tried to explain. I know it was wrong. I stayed silent because I thought it would work out. That if you felt excluded, you'd be angry, but eventually get past it. But if Mom lost everything, Nathan would collapse too. I let out a short laugh, void of joy. So you gambled with my trust, threw away my place in the family, just because you thought I was strong enough to take it. Gianna? Eric, do you even know what that feels like? My throat tightened. To realize your family thinks you're so strong you don't need anyone. To have life-changing decisions made behind your back, without asking, without telling, without caring. On the other end, he sighed. I don't expect forgiveness right away. I just want you to know, I didn't do it because I hated you, or because I wanted you gone. Everyone just thought you didn't need anyone. I used to need someone, I whispered. But no one ever stood with me. Silence stretched. I heard wind through a window, a car horn in the distance, and the faint crack of something inside me giving way. I want to make this right, Eric said finally, his voice honest. If you agree, I'll attend the family counseling. I'll also help pay if Mom moves into Brookside. Not out of obligation, but because it's time I take responsibility for what I ignored. I didn't answer right away. I sat still, eyes fixed on the photo hanging on the wall. In the fading light, the snow in the picture seemed to melt, exposing rough brown earth beneath, a detail I had never noticed before. Maybe in this wreckage, there was still space for something to begin again. Not forgiveness, but something else, an understanding of where the wound lay, so I'd know how to move forward. A year later, I stood in the living room of my new apartment, morning light flooding through the wide windows. Sunlight reflected on the polished wood floors, highlighting the photos I had hung across the walls. At the center above my desk was one frame in particular, a picture of 15 black trash bags lined up in front of my mother's house the day I was thrown out. Some might think I was insane for keeping it, but for me, it was a reminder. I had survived the day I lost everything, and from that wreckage, I rebuilt my life. The apartment was on the 8th floor of a building near downtown. I bought it after officially being promoted to head of marketing. The road here hadn't been easy, but the major projects I had led over the past 12 months had proven my worth beyond question. I had worked tirelessly, not to prove anything to my mother or brothers, but to affirm to myself that I was no longer defined by rejection. That evening, my small apartment was filled with laughter. Allison brought a bottle of red wine, Jake carried a box of apple tarts. Eric arrived early, holding a bouquet of sunflowers and a wooden box with new glassware. He hesitated at the door, but I smiled first, taking the gift. "I remember you like bright flowers," Eric said sincerely. "Since when do you notice details like that?" I teased. He laughed softly, a little embarrassed. "Since my therapist told me to practice listening instead of assuming." The words caught me off guard, but not in a bad way. Just a low note, reminding me of the journey we had both endured to be able to stand in the same room without tension. Eric had attended counseling for 6 straight months, learning to admit mistakes, to stop excusing his silence. And I had learned to see him not only as someone who betrayed me, but as someone trying to recover the better part of himself. We gathered around the table, the new glasses filled with wine. Allison raised hers, her eyes bright. "To Gianna," she said, "not just for the new apartment or the promotion, but for finding the strength to turn pain into a foundation." The clink of glasses echoed warmly. I looked around and saw faces who were there simply because they wanted to be, not out of duty or benefit. That feeling made me want to remember every second. After dinner, I led everyone to the balcony. Below, the city glowed with streams of lights, vibrant but not chaotic. I pulled out a folder, set it on the small table, and smiled at Allison. "This is something I want to share before I make it public." Jake leaned forward. "A new campaign?" "Not exactly. It's an emergency fund for young people, kicked out by their families. I'll put part of my bonus into it, and some colleagues have pledged contributions too. It's not a huge sum, but enough to cover a security deposit or help with first expenses so they don't end up on the street." Allison let out a soft "oh," her eyes full of emotion. Eric stayed quiet for a while, then said, "Gianna, you turned everything you went through into something meaningful for others. I'm not sure many people could do that." I looked at him, speaking slowly. "You know, for a long time I thought freedom meant erasing all the bad memories. But now I understand freedom isn't forgetting. It's being able to look at the pain and turn it into strength so no one else has to endure it." We sat there, listening to the wind sweep through the city, the faint scent of sunflowers drifting on the table. The silence didn't feel heavy anymore, but like a pause that let each of us reflect. Later that night, after everyone left, I cleaned the dishes and returned to my study. The photo of the 15 trash bags still hung there, straight on the wall. Beneath it, a small wooden cabinet held the folder for my new fund. I sat down, opened my journal, and wrote, "1 year ago, I was pushed out of my home with everything stuffed into garbage bags. Today, I chose to hang that photo as proof I didn't fall apart. I kept going, rebuilt, and turned my story into a foothold for those still searching for their place. The past hasn't disappeared, but it's become part of the strength I now carry." I set down my pen and looked out the window. Above, the night sky shimmered with stars, like a quiet reminder that there's always light somewhere, even when darkness spreads. And in this apartment, I knew that light finally belonged to me. Every time I look back, I still wonder. If not for those trash bags lined up outside the gate that day, would I have found the courage to cut the ropes that bound me in silence for so long? Maybe every pain carries meaning, as long as we dare to face it and turn it into change. And what about you? If one day your family turned their back on you, would you choose to stay silent, or would you stand up to protect yourself? I'd love to hear your thoughts, your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonates with you, hit subscribe to join me for the next chapters where we'll keep sharing real stories about family, about betrayal, about resilience, and about rebirth. Because sometimes the broken pieces of the past can become the very bricks that build a better future.